What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Haze Demon Show. And today we are going to be reading some more Resident Evil Zero Hour, wrote by S.D. Perry. We are going to read chapter 9, 10, and 11 in this video slash audiobook. I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am reading it and having a fantastic October Halloween events extravaganza. You know what I'm saying? It is October the 6th this time, and I done one of mine a week ago, and then I did the rest of them like 2 weeks ago. So I'm just now getting to where I need to actually read these for every day that this comes out, and hopefully we can continue this series for a while longer. I have plenty of Resident Evil books that I want to read, and then a Battle Royale book. But without further ado, let's go ahead and begin chapter 9. The baboon ran for them as soon as they stepped back into the hall, and it died spectacularly, the double barrel shotgun blasting it to shreds with a deafening roar. Billy broke and reloaded with his one remaining shell. He thought he'd had more, but it seemed he'd lost them somewhere along the way. In any case, nothing else came at them, and they headed back out toward the main room, Billy feeling much lighter than he had in a long time. Besides the much-needed laugh, a break in the relentless chaos they'd both endured. It was the first time he told his story to anyone who was actually listening, who was willing to consider that he might be telling the truth. They stopped at the giant circle of a stone sanctuary in the middle of a large chamber, looking it over. There were 6 carved animals spaced evenly around the circle, facing outward. Each had a small plaque in front of it, a small oil lamp positioned next to each plaque. The animals were expertly carved, but the whole thing was a monstrosity, a real eyesore. The animal in front of him was an eagle in flight, a snake clutched in its talons. He read aloud from its plaque, "I dance freely through the air, capturing a legless prey." He frowned, moved to the next animal over, a deer, reading from its plaque, "I stand tall on the earth with the horns proudly displayed." Rebecca had walked around the unfortunate art piece, stopped at a steel gate set into the wall behind it. The gate blocked a short hall, 2 doors set into its walls. "There's a sign here, says." She turned, studying the animals. "Basically, go from the weakest to the strongest using the lamps. It's some kind of puzzle." She grabbed one of the metal bars of the gate, shook it. "It must be how we open the gate." "So you have to light the lamps in order, starting with the weakest animal," Billy said. "Dumb. Why someone would go through all the trouble." He pulled the map out of his back pocket and studied it. "It just looks like a couple of rooms back there. I don't see an exit." Rebecca shrugged. "Yeah, but maybe there's something in there we can use. Can it hurt?" "I don't know," he said truthfully. "Maybe." She smiled, turning to the stone animal nearest her, a tiger, reading from the plaque beneath it. "I am the king of all I survey. No creature can escape my grasp." Billy moved to his left, to a carving of a snake coiled around a tree limb. "This one says, 'I creep up on my victims in legless silence, and conquer even the mightiest of kings with my poison.'" Rebecca read the last 2 aloud. The words beneath a wolf carving were, "My sharp wit allows me to bring down even the greatest horned beast." The 6th animal was a horse, reared back on its hind legs. The legend beneath it was, "No amount of cunning can match the speed of my supple limbs." Horned beast. Billy walked back to the deer, read the part about horns proudly displayed. "So the wolf is stronger than the deer," he said. "And if cunning can outrace a horse, the horse is stronger than the wolf." She said, "What's stronger than the snake?" "Gotta be the eagle. It's carrying a snake," Billy said. They each circled around the statue, calling out observations, working the puzzle. They finally agreed on a sequence, and Billy walked to each animal, lighting the appropriate oil lamp in the appropriate order, from weakest to strongest. At least, according to the statue, the order was deer, wolf, horse, tiger, snake, eagle. As he lit the eagle's lamp, there was a heavy, mechanical sound from somewhere inside the statuary, and the steel gate behind them rose smoothly, sliding into a niche at the top of the archway. Together they moved down the hall. The first room on their right appeared to hold nothing of value at first glance. There were a bunch of emptied packing crates, a few cluttered shelves. Billy was ready to move on when Rebecca stepped inside, heading for the crates. One of them was turned away from the door so they couldn't see what was in it, and when she stepped around it, she let out an excited laugh, crouching next to the crate, pushing it around so he could see. Billy hurried to her side, feeling like a kid at Christmas. Guess that damned puzzle was worth the effort after all. 2.5 boxes of 9mm rounds, a half box of 22s, which wouldn't do them much good, nor would the pair of speed loaders. Billy had to explain that the round metal gadgets were designed to quickly load revolvers, with .50 rounds, but the box of shotgun shells, 14 in all, would certainly help. Billy wouldn't have minded running across Bazooka, but all things considered, they couldn't have hoped for much better. They spent a few minutes loading the clips they had. Rebecca found a fanny pack with a broken zipper on one of the shelves, and they loaded it up, along with her utility belt. They agreed it was better to take it all, on the chance that they might discover more weapons. Billy rigged the zipper with a safety pin he found on the floor and donned the pack, comforted by the weight of so much ammo. "I could kiss you," he said, lifting the shotgun, and at her silence, he turned to look at her, saw that she'd flushed slightly. She looked away, adjusting her belt. "I didn't mean literally," he said. "I mean, not that you're not attractive, but I meant, don't have kittens," she said coolly. "I know what you meant." Billy nodded, relieved. They had enough to deal with without the male-female thing, though she is pretty cute. He shook it off, reminding himself that he'd just spent a year without any women around, and now was so not the time to address it. They had headed to the second door, found it unlocked. It was a bunk room, shabby and dirty, the bunks slapped together from plywood, the few blankets scattered around threadbare and dingy. Considering the poor accommodations and the locked steel gate down the hall, Billy thought it was safe to assume that the inhabitants hadn't been volunteers. Rebecca had told him what the diary had said about testing human subjects. The whole facility gave him the creeps. The sooner they could get out, the better. "Do we go up or down?" Rebecca asked as they moved back into the hall. "There's an observatory upstairs, right?" Billy asked. Rebecca nodded. "So let's go observe. Maybe we can signal for help or something." He realized that he'd just suggested they try and get rescued, but he didn't take it back, even understanding what most likely meant for him. He knew that he'd rather die fighting for his life than be executed, but there was Rebecca to consider. She was a good person, honest and sincere, and he'd do what he could do to get her out of this alive. They moved out, Billy wondering where his criminal nature had gotten off to, quickly deciding that he was better off without it. For the first time since that terrible day in the jungle village, he felt like himself again. Scene change. He watched them stock up on ammunition, both impressed and disappointed by their fortitude. After another consultation with their maps, they started upstairs, presumably for the observatory. Although the children could hear their voices, they could not make out their words. He'd had the children search out the tablets that would be needed, had the tablets taken to the doors that led to the observatory. Unless Billy and Rebecca were entirely moronic, which they'd already proven they were not, they would figure out how to trigger the structure's rotation, leading them closer to their escape. From there, they would move on to the laboratory, hidden behind the chapel. He wondered what they would find there, in Marcus's laboratories. More to steal, perhaps? He wanted them to uncover what they could about Umbrella's true nature, but was not pleased to see them picking through the sad remnants of Marcus's brilliant career. He still thought of the laboratories as Marcus's, though Marcus had been gone for a decade. The entire complex had been shut down after the manager's disappearance, but recently, Umbrella had opened it all. The labs, the treatment plant, the training center. None had been fully functional when the virus had hit. They were being run by skeleton crews of maintenance men, watched over by a handful of middle management hopefuls. Nonetheless, the company had lost a number of loyal employees. Billy and Rebecca moved through the east rooms on the first floor and back out into the lobby, then headed to the second floor. They found the door that would take them to the third easily enough, entering the stairwell with weapons drawn, their youthful faces determined and seemingly unafraid. He watched as they started up the stairs, emotionally torn. He wanted to see them succeed, and see them die. Was there a way to have both? They had managed the Eliminator series easily, although the primates had been weakened by hunger and neglect. How would they fare against the hunters, or the proto-tyrant? What if they came to where he and the children waited and watched? What would they do? The young man frowned, unhappy with the thought. Sensitive to his moods, a number of the many slid up his legs, across his chest, gathering in a kind of embrace. He pet them, reassured them by touch that all was well. If the two adventurers actually made it to the nest, still an unlikely premise, he would let them pass, of course, so that they might spread the story of Umbrella's sins. Or perhaps I'll kill them, he said, shrugging. He would decide when, if, it occurred. To say that he was indifferent to their fate was untrue. As he waited for the death of Umbrella to unfold, watching Billy and Rebecca had become a pleasure, and was most interested to see what would happen to them. But he would see them dead before he'd let them hurt the children again. They had reached the top of the stairs, were cautiously peering around the railing, searching for movement. The young man suddenly remembered the Centurion hiding in the walls of the breathing pool, and wondered if it would come out to see who had invaded its territory. Billy and Rebecca had best hope not. If the Eliminators were but pawns in this game, the Centurion was one of his knights. The young man eagerly leaned in to watch. Scene change. The trip up to the third floor had been uneventful. Though they'd had to hurry through the dining room, the two zombies that roamed around the tables had been too slow to bother shooting. But she didn't feel particularly comfortable taking a leisurely stroll past the dying creatures, either. Considering that Billy was 3 steps ahead of her, he obviously felt the same. Now, standing at the top of the stairs, Rebecca relaxed a little. The third floor, at least this part of it, was a single giant room, no hidden corners to worry about. The doors to the observatory were off over to their right. Straight across from them was the breeding pool, a recessed, empty pit that stretched most of the room's length, and to the left, a door that, according to the map, led to an outdoor patio. "What do you think they were breeding?" Billy asked, his voice low. Still, it echoed slightly in the vast room. "Don't know. Leeches, maybe," she said. She thought about that solitary figure they'd seen from the train, singing to the leeches, and suppressed a shudder. So observatory or patio? Billy looked back and forth, then shrugged. It seemed safe. We could each take one door, just opened and look, though no splitting up, okay? Rebecca nodded. She definitely felt safer having a bigger supply of ammo, but the fall had knocked some caution into her. She wasn't nearly so gung-ho on separating. "I'll take the patio." They moved out, their footsteps echoing in the huge chamber. The door to the observatory was closer. Only her steps rang out after a moment, as she continued on to the south wall. "Hey," Billy called. As she reached the door, he was holding up what looked like a book, 2 more in the other hand. Rebecca squinted across the large room, saw that they were made of stone, that each was rounded on one end. These were in front of the door. What are they? She said, her voice low, carried easily in the still, cool air. Decorative, maybe, he said. Each one has a word etched on the front. He looked down at the tablets, shuffled through them. Ah, we got unity, discipline, and obedience. That recording they'd heard, Dr. Marcus recitation of the company motto. They were the same 3 words. Hang on to them, Rebecca said. They might be part of some puzzle, like the animals. My thoughts exactly, Billy said, and in a lower voice, crazy-ass house. He turned back to the door, raising her handgun as she pushed at the handle, and it was locked. She sighed, her shoulders sagging, realizing how amped up she'd been for some kind of attack. Locked, she called out. Billy had opened the door to the observatory and was still looking inside. He turned back, holding the door open. This might be promising. I don't know what any of it does, but there's a shitload of equipment in here. Maybe a radio, too. A radio? She felt her hopes surge. The word come had cut off by the sound of an animal movement, a heavy rattle that reverberated through the room. She and Billy both stared at one another, the distance between them suddenly much greater than she'd previously thought. The sound came again. It was the sound of something hard rapidly clattering against the rock, like someone drumming still fingers against a tabletop, and it was loud. Whatever it was big, and getting closer. From the increase in sound, it was hard to tell where it was coming from. The echoes masked the direction. The breeding pool, Billy shouted, waving her over. Come on. She broke into a run, her heart hammering, afraid to look at the breeding pool, afraid not to. She sensed movement there, something dark and fluid, and ran faster, finally risking a glance as she passed by it. The sight of it drove conscious thought away. It was a centipede, or millipede, big enough to put those shepherd-sized spiders to shame. Yellow eyes seemed to glow from either side of a glossy black skull, long, reddish antennae twitching and quivering from the top of its head. Its long, sinuous body was low to the ground, plated and segmented, riding atop dozens of pointy red legs. It was easily 4 meters long, maybe longer, as big around as a barrel, and moving toward her, fast as its legs waving, rippling as it propelled itself across the empty floor. Run! Billy yelled, and Rebecca ran for her life, now breathing in the stink of the creature, a terrible sour smell that would have made her gag if she'd had time to bother. Billy was holding the door to the observatory open with his foot, the shotgun trained just past her. She could feel how close it was, feel it was like a shadow overtaking her. Just as she reached Billy, he fired, pumping the shotgun and firing again. She flew past him, diving through the door. The second she was through, she leaped back, the door slamming closed. In a split second passed. They heard its body brush against the door, the sound of its armor body pressing against heavy wood. They waited, both of them staring at the door. But after a few seconds the sound stopped, became the clatter of many feet moving away. Good Christ, Billy said. Rebecca nodded. He reached down, helped her to her feet, both of them breathing heavily. Let's not go back that way, Rebecca said, hoping very much they wouldn't have to. Sounds like a plan, Billy agreed. They were silent for a moment, looking around at their sanctuary. It was a big, round room, bi-level. They were standing on a kind of catwalk that half-circled the room. Another set of doors was at the northern end. Near the doors was a short ladder off the walk, leading down to a metal mesh platform that was lined with equipment. Beneath the platform was darkness. Together they moved around the walk, stopping at the second set of doors, locked. They exchanged a dismal glance, but said nothing. Heading for the ladder, Rebecca went down first, stopping at the large piece of machinery that dominated the room at its center, presumably the telescope. There was a telescope arm, but it was high overhead, out of reach. Behind her, Billy was looking at the rest of the equipment, computer banks and other machines that she didn't recognize. She turned back to the telescope, looking down at the console, and felt her breath catch. There were 3 empty depressions on it, each shaped like a small tombstone, the flat one on one end, rounded on the other. I don't see a radio here, but Billy was saying until she interrupted. Tell me you still have those tablets, she said. Billy turned, looking at the console as he unzipped his pack. He pulled the tablets out, each about the size of a paperback book, but thinner. Rebecca took them, remembering Umbrella's discomforting motto as she set them in place. Obedience breeds discipline. Discipline breeds unity. Unity breeds power. And power is life, Billy finished. As soon as the third tablet fell into place, a giant sound filled the tall room, a sound of vast machines at work, and they could feel the room around them start to descend, like an elevator. Not just the platform, the entire room, walls and all. Beneath their feet, the darkness rose up, became a pool of water, agitated into a froth by the moving platform. Rebecca had a second to wonder if the platform was going to stop. A flash of panic that they were about to be drowned, and then the sound of machinery died away, the room becoming still again. And the last fading drone of the machines, they heard a clear click sound coming from the northern doors overhead. They looked at each other, and Rebecca saw her surprise mirrored on his lean face. Guess we know where to go next, Billy said, trying a smile, but it wasn't a convincing one. Rebecca didn't even try. They were being led. But was it to freedom, or like lambs to slaughter? One way to find out. Without speaking, they turned and walked to the ladder. Just a quick reminder, everybody, that if you have not already hit that like button, make sure to do that and subscribe to the channel. You guys are probably some of my most dedicated subscribers anyway that would be listening to this, and I hope you are having a wonderful day. Let's begin Chapter 10. They stepped through the northern doors into cool night air, and Billy felt a real sense of relief. Breathing deeply, he hadn't realized how afraid he'd been that they might never leave the Umbrella facility. Unfortunately, he quickly saw that they hadn't escaped. Not exactly. The doors from the observatory had opened onto a long and narrow walk, leading straight to another building, perhaps 50 meters ahead. The walk was bordered on either side by water, some kind of reservoir or lake that abutted the east side of the facility. They moved away from the observatory, then turned back to look at where they'd been, spending a few minutes trying to figure out where they were in relation to the lobby, to the rooms they'd seen. It was a lost cause. Billy had never had much of a sense of direction, and it seemed that Rebecca didn't either. They finally gave up, turning their attention to the tall, foreboding-looking building at the other end of the path. They walked toward it, Billy still taking in big lungfuls of sweet, misty air. It was late, probably in the early hours of morning, but there was no sky to judge by, only a great gray cloak of rain clouds overhead. "Where do you think we are?" he asked. "No idea," Rebecca answered. "Somewhere with a phone, I hope." "And a kitchen," Billy added. He was starving. "Yeah," she agreed, her tone wistful, stocked with pizza and ice cream. "Pepperoni?" "Hawaiian," she said, "and pistachio ice cream." "Yeah." Billy made a face, enjoying the conversation. They hadn't had much time to get to know each other, though he felt a kind of bond with her, the connection he'd often felt for others during combat. "You probably like orange food, too." "Orange food?" "Yeah, you know, that unnatural orange color. They put it on macaroni and cheese, artificially flavored orange drinks, snack cakes, fried cheese curls." Rebecca grinned. "Got me. I love that stuff." Billy rolled his eyes. "Teenagers." "You are a teenager, aren't you?" "Just old enough to vote," she said, sounding slightly defensive. Before he could ask how she'd made it into stars at her age, she added, "I'm one of those brilliant whiz kid types, college grad and everything. And how old are you, Grandpa? 30? It was Billy's turn to feel slightly defensive. 26. She laughed. "Wow, that's ancient. Let me get you a wheelchair." "Shut up," he said, grinning. "I said, let me get you a wheelchair," she mockingly shouted, cracking him up entirely. They were still laughing when they passed a small open guardhouse set into the right side of the walkway and saw the body on the floor inside. Part of a body, thought Billy, his good mood drying up in a hurry as they stopped, helpless not to look. The legs and one arm were missing, making the face-down corpse look as though he, or she, it was too far gone to tell, was drowning in the thick puddle of blood that surrounded it. Neither of them spoke again as they finished their walk to the building, sobered by the reminder of the tragedy that had occurred here. It was impossible to keep in mind every second. Dwelling on the horror of the viral outbreak would make it too hard to function, and the occasional release of laughter was important, even necessary, to their continued mental health. On the other hand, if you could look at the body of a dead man and keep laughing, mental health became an issue in an entirely different way. They reached the unknown structure, slowing, studying the layout. They were small paths branching off of the main walk just in front of the building, hemmed with flowers and trees that had long since gone to seed, the paths disappearing behind roughly shaped hedges. There were a few unbroken outdoor lights, but only enough to make the shadows seem even darker. Not the most inviting environment, but Billy didn't see any zombies or leech people, which made it a hell of a lot better than the last place. There were a few wide stone steps leading up to the double doors. Billy kept his eye on the shadowy paths as Rebecca walked up to the steps, giving doors a shake. Locked, she said. Hell with that, Billy said, following her up. He tried the handle himself, decided that while the wood was strong, the lock wasn't. Not even a deadbolt. Stand back. He turned to one side, lowered his center of gravity, and gave the lock a solid kick, then another. On the third, he heard the wood splintering, and it crashed open on the fifth, the cheap metal lock flying apart. They both stepped into the doorways, looking inside. After all they'd been through, he thought he was past surprise, but he was wrong. It was a church, as ornate as any he'd seen, from the stained glass set high in the wall behind the altar to the gleaming wooden pews. It was also wrecked. At least half the pews were overturned, and they could only see inside because of the giant hole in the ceiling not far from where they stood. Look at the altar, Rebecca whispered. Billy nodded. Not so much the altar itself as what was around it. On the platform at the front of the church were hundreds of burned down candles, tipped over statues of religious icons, many of them broken or blackened with ash, and great bunches of dead flowers. It was, in a word, creepy. I'm okay with getting out of here, Billy said, raising his voice slightly, when he realized that he, too, was whispering. We should check out the grounds and see where some of those paths go. Rebecca nodded, stepping back, and then something huge and black was swooping down toward them from the high, vaulted ceiling, something that emitted an incredibly high-pitched squeal that fluttered and darted and flapped giant dusty wings. The time slowed to a crawl, long enough for Billy to get a clear look at it. It was some kind of a bat, but much bigger than any he'd ever heard of. The thing had the wingspan of a condor. Easy. It pulled up at the last instant, flew menacingly back into the darkness overhead, but had some close enough for a wave of its rotten meat breath to wash over them. Billy pushed Rebecca back with one arm, grabbing at the broken handles of the doors with the other. He jerked them closed, wishing now that he hadn't forced them open, realizing only a second later that it didn't matter. They could hear the massive bat as it pushed its way through the hole in the roof. Could hear its giant, ratty claws scrabbling at the shingles. Go! Billy yelled. They ran down the steps, Rebecca leading them to the right. There was more protection there, part of the pathway that skirted the building covered. It turned sharply once, twice, the turns hidden by overgrown bushes and plants. Rebecca was fast, but Billy kept up, more than a little motivated by the image of those leathery, fluttering wings enfolding him, those claws piercing his flesh. There, Rebecca pointed, to the right of the path just ahead, what looked like an elevator, of all things, freestanding at the side of the church. Billy wasn't sure it was their best bet, but they could clearly hear the beat of wings overhead somewhere, the fiercely high squeal of the bat searching for prey. He followed Rebecca to the door, silently thanking God when the door slid open to her touch. It was small, barely room for two. They shoved inside, saw that it only went down, just as well. Billy had no desire to visit the church's belfry, see if the mad bat had any brothers or sisters. Rebecca hit the switch to close the doors. Just before they closed, a zombie staggered toward them from seemingly out of nowhere, a woman reaching toward them with fingers that were shredded to bone. She moaned, revealing blackened teeth, and then the doors were sliding closed, shutting out the zombie, shutting out the high-frequency screech of the infected bat. They both sagged, leaning against the walls of the small elevator. They could hear the female zombie's hungry cries through the doors, hear the sharp scratch of her bone fingertips against the metal doors. Within a few seconds, her low, gravelly moans were joined by another voice, then a third, all of them wailing in eagerness and frustration. There were only two choices, B1 or B2. Billy looked at Rebecca, who shook her head, her face pale. Outside, the zombies continued to claw for entry, and Billy pushed B1. The elevator didn't move. Okay, B2 then, Billy said, hoping that they hadn't just trapped themselves. He punched the button. The elevator started with a lurch, then descended smoothly. Billy edged slightly in front of Rebecca, readying the shotgun, hoping that the doors weren't about to open to a horde of infected creatures, all eager for a late-night snack. The doors slid open without any sound, revealing a corridor littered with rubble, but otherwise empty. He pushed the button for B1 again, hoping for another option, but the elevator doors didn't even close. Apparently they could either go to the bat and the zombies, or they could explore the second basement level. Billy opted for exploration. He stepped out cautiously, Rebecca right behind. Like the training facility mansion, the decor, the architecture was refined and probably priceless. The floor was marble, chipped but still polished to a high sheen. The hall lined with handsome support pillars, the entries high and arched. To their left was a stairwell that led up, choked with broken rock and shattered drywall. There was another door on the left up ahead, just before the corridor turned sharply to the right. They paused at the stairwell, but it was a lost cause. The debris piled floor to the ceiling. If they wanted to go back up, it was the elevator or nothing. Though at the moment, Billy did not want to go back up. It seemed like the constant barrage of disgusting, dangerous, frightening creatures would never end, and he was more than ready for a break. All those in favor of no more zombies, more monsters, he said softly. Aye, Rebecca answered, her tone just as soft. She shot him a smile, but it looked strained. They started forward, boots crunching as they waded through the rubble. Rebecca stayed by the first door as Billy checked the rest of the corridor. There was one other obvious door, set with a combination lock, and a third possible door. Billy wasn't sure. It looked very much like the corridor, simply dead-ended in a blue wall, but there was an elaborate shrine set up there. Twin statues bookended a profiled relief of someone who looked very much like James Marcus. There was no keyhole, but beneath the bust was an empty depression the size of a child's fist, as though it were missing a piece. Lovely. 2 more puzzle blocks, Billy thought sourly, walking back to Rebecca. What was it with these people? If they needed to be so goddamn clever, why couldn't they just stick to crossword puzzles? Thankfully, the first door was unlocked. They stepped inside, finding themselves in another shabbily elegant room, this one lined with bookshelves. Stained oriental rug lay on the floor in the room's first section. The room itself was vaguely U-shaped. There were several lamps on, making it the brightest room they'd been in all night, and besides the shelves, there were several low tables and a small desk with an antique typewriter. Billy walked to the nearest desk, picked up a scrap of paper. Trouble is unlikely, but I've taken precautions, he read. To hide a leaf, put it in the forest. To hide a key, make it look like a leaf. Gee, that clears things up, Rebecca said, and Billy nodded again. What was it with these people? Rebecca looked the shelves over while Billy walked the room, noting a large hole in the ceiling around the corner from the door. It was high, but using one of the tables. Most of these are biology, Rebecca called. Mammalian, insectile, amphibian. Come look at this, Billy called back. As she stepped around the corridor, Billy grabbed the nearest table, pushing it under the hole. He still wouldn't be able to reach. I could go up, Rebecca said. Look around, find a rope or something for you to climb. Billy frowned. I don't know. Last time you went looking. Yeah, she said, but her expression was set. She was willing, if not eager, and they had to do something. Billy stepped on the table, interlacing his fingers to give her a boost. She climbed up after him, put her right foot in his hands, one hand on his shoulder. As before, she was light as a feather. Billy could probably bench press 2 of her without much trouble. He pushed her up easily, Rebecca disappearing from sight as she crawled through. A second later, she was back at the hole. Seems clear, but it's dark, she said. Looks like a lab room. Lots of shelves, couples of desks. Let me see what I can find. She disappeared again. Billy waited, staring up at the hole, reminding himself that she knew how to handle herself. She had already proven herself stronger and more capable than any of the seasoned soldiers he'd known, and if there was trouble, she could just hop back down, nothing to worry about. Rebecca let out a short, sharp scream, and Billy's blood went cold. Rebecca! He shouted, his gaze fixed helplessly on the dark hole overhead. Scene change. It looked like a lab, one that had only been used intermittently in the last decade, and hadn't been cleaned at all in that time. There was a thick dust on the floor and shelves, but things had been moved at some point, leaving signs. Tracks behind the chairs, fingerprints on specimen bottles. Rebecca took a quick look at her immediate surroundings, then leaned back over the hole. Billy's expression was tense, expectant. Seems clear, but it's dark. Looks like a lab room. Lots of shelves, couple of desks. Let me see what I can find. She turned, surveyed the small room again, and realized that it was bigger than she thought. Part of it, hidden behind a large shelf that bisected the area. She wouldn't have noticed if it not for the faint pale, bluish light that seemed to be emanating from the hidden section. Holding her 9mm, she stepped around the corner, and yelped, almost firing at the glowing, floating monster in front of her, before she realized that it wasn't alive. Rebecca! I'm okay, she called back, staring at the bizarre creature. Got a surprise is all. Hang on. She stepped closer to the human-sized specimen tube, filled with clear liquid, lit from inside. There were actually 4 of the tubes, all in a row, each containing a slightly different horror than the one before. The things inside had been human, once, but they had been surgically altered and almost certainly infected with T-virus. She tried to think of something description to give Billy, but they defied descriptions. Grossly misshapen limbs hung from muscular patchwork bodies, the nearly unrecognizable faces wearing bizarre expressions of anguish and bloodlust. They were horrifying. Past the row of humanoid monstrosities was a specimen case, filled with much smaller tubes. Rebecca leaned in, saw that each tube had a dead leech inside. She grimaced, was about to turn away, when she realized that one of the tubes was different. The leech inside was not a leech. She pushed the dusty glass door aside and pulled out the anomalous tube, holding it up to the faint light. The tube's cap was glued or soldered shut, and the thing inside was leech-shaped, but was sculpted or carved in a deep cobalt blue. Why would anyone make a fake leech and then put it... She blinked, remembering that piece of paper Billy had read from. To hide a leaf, put it in the forest. To hide a key. Rebecca walked to the back to the hole, held the tube out for Billy to see. I think I found the leaf key, she said, and tossed it down. Or I guess I should say, leech key. Billy caught it neatly, peered at it. I'm pretty sure it'll fit one of those doors, he said. Come back down, we can go check. The cap won't come off, she started, stopping As Billy dropped the tube on the floor next to the table, he grinned up at her, then jumped down, stomping the tube with the heel of his boot. Glass crinkled and crunched, and a second later, he was holding the carving up. Not a problem, he said. Come on up. She chewed her lip, looking around the lab. There were file cabinets, papers lying around. You go check. I'm going to see if I can find another map. Billy frowned. Are you sure? Afraid to go by yourself? She called, smiling slightly. Frankly, yes, he said, but smiled back. Okay, I'll be back in a minute. Don't wander too far away, all right? If you need anything, give me a call. Rebecca tapped her radio. No sweat. He gazed up at her another moment, then turned and walked away. Rebecca looked around the lab once more, focusing on the larger of the two desks in the room. Okay, Marcus, let's see if you left us anything useful, she said, and moved to the desk, unaware that she was being watched very, very closely as she picked up a sheaf of papers and started to read. Scene change. This will not do. He clenched his fist furious. The children tried to soothe him, crawled across his shoulders, but he brushed them away, ignored their attempts. Rebecca reading Dr. Marcus's personal notes, finding the charm that led to Dr. Marcus's inner sanctum, giving it to Billy. All they had to do was get to the cable car, perhaps pick a lock or two, and they could be on their way. But it seemed they would not leave the memory of Dr. Marcus alone, that they had to violate the very few privacies he had left. Not if we stop them, he told the children, watching as Billy used the small effigy to open Dr. Marcus's rooms. As Rebecca rifled carelessly through Marcus's private papers, it had been an amusing diversion watching these two, but it was over now. The world would have to learn the truth about Umbrella without them. Time to send the children out to play. Chapter 11. As he'd suspected, that dead-end shrine was a door, and the tiny leech statue that Rebecca found fitted perfectly in the door's lock. There was a soft, hidden click, and the door unlatched. Billy studied the front of the door as a moment before going in, deciding that the profile was, in fact, that of Dr. James Marcus. He wondered why the leechman they'd seen on the train had looked like Marcus. The leeches had been controlled by the obviously much younger man, the one singing outside. Was the real Marcus still around? It didn't seem likely. That diary Rebecca had found, Marcus had been raving, paranoid, that Spencer was coming for him, coming to take his work, and that it had been 10 years ago. People that nuts usually weren't able to hold down day jobs. Rebecca was waiting. He set the minor mystery aside and pushed past the extravagant door that the barrel of the barrel of the shotgun. A quick scan for movement. Nothing, and he lowered the weapon, stepping farther inside. Wow, he said, hushed. Looking around the room, it was an office, large, expensively fitted with built-in shelves and cabinets on one side, all dark, polished wood and beveled glass, an ornate fireplace opposite. The antique wood furniture, a low table, chairs, a big desk, was beautiful, the carpet plush, silencing his steps. He saw a door at the back of the room, behind the desk, and mentally crossed his fingers that it would turn out to be their escape route. Much of the room's light came from a huge aquarium that dominated the northeast corner near where he stood, painting everything with watery bluish light, though the aquarium itself was empty. Billy frowned, stepped closer. Not empty. There were no fish, no rocks or plants, but there were a number of things floating at the top, disgusting things, unrecognizable but no less grotesque. They appeared to be pieces of human flesh, but shapeless, boneless, like deformed, amputated body parts. Billy quickly moved on, disturbed by the pale floating objects. One of the wall cabinets stood open, and Billy walked to it, scanning the books inside. An ancient photo album lay on one shelf, and he picked it up. He knew he had to get back to Rebecca, but he was curious. wondering if the bust on the door meant he was in Marcus's office. The photos were old, yellowed, and curled. He turned a few pages, decided it was a waste of time. He started to put the album back, and a loose picture fluttered out. He stooped to pick it up, held it up to the blue, rippling light. The picture itself wasn't particularly interesting. A trio of young men from the 30s or 40s, all looking clean-cut and well-scrubbed, smiling at the picture taker. On the back, someone had written, "To James, to commemorate your graduation, 1939. Billy studied the photo, decided that the young man in the middle could be James Marcus. Something about the shape of the head. He looked familiar, somehow. That guy, he said, nodding to himself, the singer from the train. They hadn't seen him well, but he had the same stance, the same wide shoulders. He could be Marcus's son, or grandson. There was a puzzle here, and he was starting to think he'd just found another piece. If Spencer had overthrown Marcus, taken his work, wouldn't Marcus's son, or his son's son, want revenge? Maybe the viral outbreak hadn't been an accident. Maybe the guy with the leeches had done it. Billy sighed, setting the photo on top of the album. That was all good and well, but for all practical purposes, who gave a shit? He needed to be looking for a way out. He checked the desk for keys or maps, found nothing, and went to the room's second door, thankfully unlocked. He pushed it open, felt his hopes dwindle. There was no big tunnel with flashing exit sign. It was an art storage room. Looked like paintings stacked against walls, a few statues draped with sagging drop cloths. One statue was uncovered, a white marble piece that looked like one of those Roman gods, seated against one flocked wall, its dusty gaze uplifted, a hand cupped near its belly, and holding something green. Billy walked over and took the small object from the statue's pallid fingers, smiling faintly when he realized what it was. It was another carving of a leech, this one in green instead of blue. Another key, perhaps, to another door, and this one might really be their ticket out. Scene change. Day 1. Administrated tea to 4 leeches. Their single-minded biology makes them perfect candidates for this research, but they may be too simplistic to adapt. No immediate changes observed. The word 4 was underlined. In the margin, someone had scrawled "change sequence" and a spidery hand encircled it. It was part of a lab journal, mostly dates and numbers. Rebecca had been about to set it back down when she'd seen that several phrases and words had been underlined on one of the last pages. She read on, looking for more of the marked passages. Day 8. A week now. Rapid growth to double their former size. Signs of transformation emerging. Spawning successful. Their numbers doubled, but cannibalistic behavior has been initiated, presumably due to increase in appetite. Hastened to augment food supply, but lost 2. Numbers doubled, and 2 were underlined. Day 12. Provided them with live food, but lost half when prey fought back. However, they are learning from experience, beginning to exhibit group attack behavior. Evolution is exceeding expectations. Lost half was underlined. There were no more marked entries, but Rebecca skimmed on, disturbed by the success of the strange experiment. Day 23. Leeches no longer exhibit individual traits, can move as a collective. Day 31. Breeding at a fantastic rate, eating everything offered now. The last entry painted clearly for her just how far into madness Dr. Marcus had slipped. Day 46. A day worthy of remembrance. Today, they began to mimic me. They recognize their father, I believe. I feel such strong affection for them, from them. Do they love? I think they do. It's us. Now, only me and my brilliant children. No one will take them away from me. With all that I've learned, they wouldn't dare. Hey, Billy, It was Billy, calling up through the floor. Rebecca set the papers down and walked to the hole, kneeling next to it. "Did you find anything useful?" she asked, looking down at him. "Maybe. Catch," he said, tossing something small up through the hole. Rebecca caught it. It was another of the leech keys, this one green. "Is there a door up there with a bust of Marcus on the front?" Billy asked. Rebecca shook her head. "I don't know. Not in this room, anyway. I've been reading more about this wacko experiments. Want me to go take a look around?" Billy hesitated. "Why don't I come up? We can both look. Just let me find another table or something." "I'll be careful," Rebecca said. "Didn't you say there was another door down there? Maybe you should try and get it open while I see if I can find a keyhole for this thing." "It's a combination lock," Billy said. "Unless you have a set of picks handy, I don't think we're going to get it open." Rebecca sighed. Too bad Jill Valentine wasn't with them. She was on the Alpha team, and according to Barry, she could break into anything. Change sequence. Wait, combination lock. Billy nodded, and Rebecca edged back from the hole, hurrying to the desk with Marcus's notes. She quickly read through the marked passages, did the math as she hurried back. 4 leeches, doubled, lost 2, lost half. "Try 4863, she said. "Wild guess?" Billy asked. Rebecca smiled faintly. "Probably. Just check." She held up the green leech carving. "I'll see if I can find where this goes." Billy nodded, reluctantly, and Rebecca stood up and started for the room's door, not sure if she was being brave or stupid. She didn't really want to do anything alone, not since her encounter with the primates, but as long as she was already on the first floor, it made sense for her to take a look. The lab's door opened into a short corridor. 3 doors, besides the one she'd come through. The first door, on the right, was locked. The second door, around a corner, and also to the right, was open, but a quick glance inside showed nothing but a large, empty room. A small office set to one side. It was too dark to see much else. Rebecca closed the door, relieved that she was already 2/3 of the way through her little search, and went to the last door at the end of the corridor, also unlocked. Rebecca pushed it open, saw yet another door only a meter in front of her. To the left, the room opened up into what appeared to be the same lab she started from. It wasn't, but with the way the rooms were orientated, it had to be connected to the first lab. Maybe they'd split it up at some point. A movement. There, near a table by the connecting wall, was one of the infected, a gaunt, sallow man, his eyes blank, his mouth open and hungry. He shuffled toward her, making a soft gurgling sound in the back of his throat. He was slow, very slow. Rebecca looked between him and the door in front of her, the weight of the leech key warm in her hand. Taking a glance, she stepped forward and pushed at the door, was through and quickly closing it behind her before the too thin zombie could take another step. She'd stepped into the operating room, old and unclean. The once sterile tiles gray with a light film of scum. A few metal gurneys standing about on the tilted wheels, and there, across from her and to the left, was a greenish door with a profile of Dr. Marcus on front. "Gotcha," she said, moving to the door, studiously avoiding a closer look at the operating table set in the room's far corner after she caught a glimpse of the heavy restraints attached. She had an idea of what Marcus had been up to. She didn't need to suffer the details. The small leech fit perfectly into a depression just under the likeness of Dr. Marcus, and she heard the sound of the latch giving way. The door opened, and she took a step back, staggered by the smell, an odor she'd become all too familiar with. The narrow room was lined on both sides with the morgue drawers, several of them standing open. There were 2 bodies on the floor, neither moving, but she trained her handgun on the closest. All the same, breathing shallowly, she walked inside. God, please, let there be something here worth locking up, she thought, stepping past an overturned gurney. And let it be in plain sight, if it's not too much trouble. There was no way she was going to search each drawer. At the far end of the room was an offshoot to the right. Rebecca stepped over the second body, turned the corner, trying not to gag at the atrocious smell. There was another metal gurney pushed to one side, and on top was a single metal key. She picked it up, feeling the mix of emotion. She'd found something that was good, but whoopee! Another key. It could go anywhere. Could be the key to the Marcus's summer home for all she knew. Maybe that first door in the corridor. Rebecca? She pocketed the key and picked up her radio, moving toward the door as she answered. Yeah, what's up? Over. She moved through the operating room, stopping at the door that led back to the partial lab. She'd want to run through to the corridor's entrance, avoid having to shoot that zombie if she could. There's no dial on the lock, Billy said, sounding irritated. I went back and checked Marcus's office, but I didn't see anything. You had any luck? Over. Maybe, she said. Let me check on one thing. I'll meet you back at the library. Over. Careful. Over and out. Careful. Rebecca shook her head slightly as she clipped the radio back to her belt, astounded at how fast a relationship could change. Given the right, or wrong, circumstances, only a few hours ago, she'd threatened to shoot him, had been convinced that he was ready to shoot her. Now they were, well, friends. Was probably not the right word, but it was seemingly awfully unlikely that they'd end up killing one another. For the first time in a while, she wondered what her teammates were doing. Was the manhunt for Billy still on? Had they been looking for her, for Edward, or had they run into troubles of their own? Been caught out by the fallout from the T-virus spill? And speaking of, she listened at the door of a moment, heard nothing. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open, quickly stepping across the short distance to the next door, not even looking into the lab. As she closed the door behind her, she heard a muffled wail of frustration and felt a surge of pity for the hollow-eyed victim. The guy had probably worked here, but she wouldn't wish the zombie sickness on her worst enemy. It was a bad way to go, hands down. She walked to the first door she tried, hoping the key would work, doubting that it would. She supposed that have to do a more thorough search for whatever it unlocked, or just keep looking for something else. Another map, another key, another hole in a floor somewhere. It was disheartening to say the least. If they couldn't turn anything up, they'd have to use the elevator again. Take their chances above ground. She slipped the key into the door's lock and turned it. Heard and felt the lock give. No shit, she mumbled, grinning, and opened the door. Something huge and dark leaped for her, howling. Scene change. Billy waited at the hole between the first and the second floors, idly, wondering if there was a way to blow that dial lock door open with one of the magnum shells, and heard a terrible, inhuman cry echoing down from the first floor, followed by 2 shots. He didn't think to try the radio. He hopped onto the low table beneath the hole, hefted the shotgun through, then jumped after it, catching the edges with his hands. He'd doubted his abilities before, but now it didn't cross his mind that he might not be able to pull himself up. With a grunt of exertion, he lifted his body through the hole, first scrabbling to his elbows, then getting one knee up. He grabbed the shotgun and was on his feet in time to hear the animal scream again, a strange and unearthly sound, like a bird being shredded to pieces. He spent a half-second orientating himself, finding the door, and then he was running. He crashed through the door into a hall, and there was Rebecca, backed against the wall opposite, one sleeve of her shirt torn, her arm scarred with 4 deep scratches, pointing her weapon at, what the hell? At a monster, an immense reptilian monster. It was humanoid, hugely muscled, its pebbled skin a dark, noxious green. Its arms were so long that its claws almost touched the floor. When it saw Billy, it dropped its thick jaw and screeched again, the small eyes in its flat, sloping skull practically glowing with malevolence. The thin stream of dark blood flowed from its upper chest, one of Rebecca's shots, but it didn't seem to overly affected by its wound. Try this, Billy thought, bringing the shotgun up as Rebecca opened fire again. He blasted the creature full in the face, pumped the weapon, and fired again, not waiting to see what the first round had done. And the thing's face was gone, splashed across the wall and floor behind it. its heavy body toppling. A frothing river of blood poured from the shreds of its neck, from what little was left of its head, a bit of jawbone, of teeth, tatters of dark flesh. Billy didn't move for a few seconds, listening, searching for another sound, another movement, but there wasn't. He turned his attention to Rebecca, who was gripping her injured left shoulder with her right hand. Blood seeped from beneath her fingers. "The pack on my belt," she said. "There's a bottle of antiseptic wash in there, some bandages, and tape. It just clawed me. It didn't bite." She looked pale, wincing as Billy cleaned her wound and taped it, but she bore up well, taking the pain rather than giving it to it. It was bad, probably needed stitches, but it also could have been a lot worse. When he was finishing up, she nodded toward the half-open door across from them. It was locked in there, the thing, I mean. She sounded shocked, dazed. Billy walked to the door, wanting to be in the way of anything else that might come popping out. He stopped at the headless monster, stood looking down at it. "Kinda looks like the creature from the Black Lagoon on steroids," Billy said, glancing back, hoping for a smile. He got one, shaky, but real, and once again was impressed with her fortitude. It was rare, to be able to recover so quickly from an unexpected attack, especially by a nightmare like the monster in front of him. Most people would be shaking for hours afterwards. Rebecca moved to stand beside him. She nudged one of the creature's bulky legs with her boot. "Amazing," she said. "The things they were doing out here. Genetic engineering, recombinant viruses." "I think psychotic is the word you're looking for," Billy said. She nodded. "Can't argue that. Let's see if it was guarding anything important." They stepped around the creature, Rebecca explaining what she'd found on the rest of the floor as they moved into the room. It was a kennel of some kind, but Billy was fairly certain it hadn't been used to board dogs. There were stacks of steel bar cages, many of them fitted with restraints, and the smell in the air was that of wild animals, a gamey, rank odor. "Which is where I found the key to this room," she was saying. "I was hoping that meant there'd be something useful here." The room was U-shaped, split by shelves. They moved around the shelves, Rebecca letting out a small sound of disgust. Heaped in the far corner was a heap of torn fur and gnawed bones, what appeared to be the remains of a few of those baboon creatures. There was a lot of feces scattered about, too, dense piles of a black, tarry substance that smelled like shit. It seemed the monster had been locked up for a while. There was a small wood table between two of the cage stacks, a few papers scattered across the top. Billy walked over, stepping carefully, and picked up the page on top as Rebecca started poking through a few of the open cages. It appeared to be part of a report. And yet, research to date has shown that when the progenitor virus is administered to living organisms, violent cellular changes cause breakdowns in every major system, most consistently the CNS. Furthermore, no satisfactory method has been found to control the organism for use as weapons. Clearly, greater coordination at the cellular level is essential to enable further growth. Experiments on insecta, amphibia, mammalia, primate, have all fallen short of projected results. It appears that no further progress can be made without using humans as the base organism. Our recommendation at this time is that the experimental animals be kept alive for further study, and as possible pray for field testing of newer suggested hybrid BOWs, such as the upcoming Tyrant series. Jesus. Billy rifled through the pages, looking the rest of the report, but there were only a handful of coffee-stained feeding schedules. Tyrant series? All the creatures we've seen, and they were working on something that could conceivably kick said creatures' asses? Ha! Billy looked up, saw Rebecca holding something small up in the air, a triumphant grin on her face. "Dial anyone?" He dropped the report back on the table. "You're kidding me." "Nope. It was in one of the cages." She tossed the item to him. Billy caught it. felt his own grin of surfacing. It was exactly what he'd been looking for, a rounded knob made to fit on the front of the combination lock downstairs. 4863, Billy asked, and Rebecca nodded. 4863, she repeated, and held up her hand, showing him her crossed fingers. Billy crossed his own. It was dumb, a child's superstition, but he was long past the point of caring whether or not he appeared rational. Anything that could help, he'd give it a shot. Let's go see, he said, feeling hope resurface yet again as they moved out of the monster's room, amazed at how resilient that particular feeling was. There was a quote somewhere about how, as long as there was life, there was hope. He'd heard it when he'd been on trial. Had thought it obvious and stupid at the time. How strange, and somehow marvelous, that he would discover the truth of that statement fighting for his life in such very circumstances. Together, they headed back for the lab. Billy kept his fingers crossed. Alrighty, guys, that is going to be it for this video. We have done 3 more chapters. I am definitely enjoying reading this. I do believe the next video we are going to finish the book, and then we will begin this is technically Resident Evil 0, right? So we'll be reading Resident Evil 1 after this one. So it should be very awesome indeed. Thank you all so very much for staying a while and listening to me reading the book. Like I said, it's been a really long time since I've read these, and I'm pretty excited about it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Don't forget to bring a towel. Peace out.